I have thought about that morning more than any other morning of my life, and the part I keep going back to is not the news, or the road, or the river. It is a question my son asked me twice in the kitchen at 20 to 7, and the answer I gave him in about a second and a half, because I was looking for my keys. He said, "What if somebody's hurt?" I said, "Then you call me, you don't go outside." He said, "Okay." He put his bowl in the sink, and then, while I was checking the side pocket of my bag for the parking money I wasn't going to spend, he asked it again, in the exact same words, the way he used to when he was small and wanted a different answer. "What if somebody's hurt, though?" And I said the same thing, faster. "You call me, Wyatt. Inside. Doors locked. That's the whole rule." He was 12. It was the 4th day I had left him home alone all day, and the 11th day of that summer, and I had a jury badge clipped to my purse strap that said alternate 2, and I was going to be late for a trial about a grain contract that had nothing to do with either of us. I have never known whether he was asking a general question or a specific one. He'd been at the front window that week more than usual, but I didn't ask because asking would have taken 4 minutes, and I had a 52-mile drive with a detour in it. That's the whole story, really. The rest is just distance. My name is Renata. People call me Ren. At the time, I was 43, and I did medical billing and coding from a folding table in my dining room for a 2-doctor family practice up in Bell Creek, which meant I was the ideal juror. No employer to write a hardship letter. No coworkers to inconvenience. Nothing on my calendar but codes and denials and my own kid. When the summons came in April, I circled the date on the wall calendar and wrote Ask Marcy about Wyatt, and then never asked Marcy, because Marcy had gone to Arizona, and because Wyatt had spent all spring telling me he was old enough to be by himself and being right about it. We lived on Sumac Road outside Hoyt, which is a village with a post office, a shuttered bank, and a grain elevator that only runs in the fall. Our house was yellow, rented, with a gravel drive and a propane tank we filled twice a year, and a window unit in the living room that Wyatt was allowed to run from noon to 7. 2 houses down, the Vances, Charisse Vance, who worked second shift at the distribution center in Quintus, her mother Ivy, who watched Aubrey during the day, and Aubrey, who was 9 and rode her bike in a circle in their yard for hours at a time like she was on a track. And 3 houses down, past the ditch in the mailbox with the reflective numbers, Roy Tibbet. I need to be honest about Roy from the start, because if I clean it up now, the rest of it won't mean anything. Roy was 68, a widower, and he burned trash in a barrel behind his garage, which is not legal in our county between May and September. He had a dog named Duchess that got out and stood in the road and would not be talked to. In 2019, he backed his truck out of his drive without looking, and a kid on a 4-wheeler put himself in the ditch avoiding him. And Roy's reaction was to yell at the kid at length in front of 2 other neighbors. And somewhere back in the 70s, he'd done time for an assault. I heard that from Charisse's mother and never verified it and repeated it anyway. Twice. I filed a complaint about the burn barrel in June of the year before. Code enforcement gives you a carbon form. There is a line on it for the property owner's telephone number, which you're supposed to get off the tax rolls, and I wrote his in pencil in my own handwriting, 555 and then the rest of it. I took a picture of the form with my phone before I mailed it, because I have been poor long enough to photograph anything I hand to the county. And I told my son, more than once, in the voice I used for things that were not up for discussion, you do not go to Roy Tibbet's house. You do not talk to him at the mailbox. If Duchess is loose, you come inside. He was 7 when I started saying it. He was 12 when I was still saying it. The trial was in Delmore, the county seat, 52 miles south, and the reason it was 52 miles and not 31 is the Vircher River, which cuts across our county at an angle like somebody dragged a stick through it. There are 3 ways across the Vircher in that county, and by the 2nd week of June, this is how they stood. State Route 9 crosses at Kells Ferry on a concrete bridge that the state had closed on the first Monday in June to seal and resurface the deck. Signs went up in May. The detour ran east on the Bethel Road. 22 miles east, the Quintus Bridge, an old steel truss with a posted weight limit carrying the traffic of 2 counties because of the resurfacing. And down at the bottom of the map, the Ferry Road low-water bridge, a concrete slab with pipes under it that the county had condemned in April after an inspection and blocked with 2 Jersey barriers and a sign that said, "Bridge out." One being resurfaced, one overloaded, one condemned. That was the arrangement of my county on the 12th of June, and none of it had anything to do with anybody getting sick. All of it was on the books before the first person in our state stopped answering when you said their name. I want that understood, because for a long time afterward people would ask me how the roads got closed so fast, and the answer is that they didn't. They were already closed. Ordinary reasons, ordinary paperwork, filed months ahead. The sickness didn't close the roads. It just made the closures matter. That Thursday, I left at 4 minutes after 7. Wyatt was on the couch with the fan pointed at him and a bowl of cereal he had poured himself after the one I'd made him. I told him the pizza rolls were in the door of the freezer and not to run the microwave and the window unit at the same time. He said, "I know." I told him I'd be home a little after 5 if we got out on time. He said, "Okay." And then, at the door, "Take the Bethel Road." That was our joke that week. I'd been taking it since Monday, 40 minutes of 2-lane behind a lime truck. I said, "Thanks, buddy." I did not hug him. I want to be accurate. I touched the top of his head on the way past, the way you touch a door frame. The courthouse in Delmore is a 1912 building with a modern annex bolted onto the back, and the jury assembly room is in the annex. And Judge Petrus Halm ran his courtroom the way men his age do. Phones went into a canvas pouch with numbered pockets on a rack by the door. At 9 in the morning, and again at 1. You got them back at recess. You were not to discuss the case, read about the case, or, in his phrasing, conduct research on the internet, which is a swamp. I was alternate too. There were 14 of us, and 2 of us were furniture. We had already lost Juror 6 on Tuesday, a woman with a diabetic husband who was excused after a conference in chambers that took 40 minutes, and Judge Halm had been visibly unhappy about it. And alternate 1 had moved up into her chair. That left me. If they lost one more, I was the trial. So on Thursday morning I put my phone in pocket 9 and sat down in the box and listened to a man from a co-op explain delivery windows on soybeans. Small things I noticed and did not add up. The courtroom was hot and had been all week, and the bailiff said the annex chiller was down and maintenance couldn't get a part. Fine. It was June. Juror 11, a retired postal clerk named Dale, came back from the men's room at 10:15 and said the water fountain in the hall had a sign on it. Nobody asked about what. At about 10:40, a deputy came in the side door and stood at the rail and waited until the co-op man finished a sentence, then went to the bench and said something to Judge Halm for maybe 15 seconds. Judge Halm nodded, and the deputy left, and nothing happened. Court went on. I remember watching that deputy walk out and thinking he had a stain on the back of his shirt from leaning against something. And at 11:20, the plaintiff's attorney lost his place in a binder for a long time, longer than a man loses his place. And when he found it again, his hands were not steady. And I thought, he's been getting texts under the table and he's going to get caught. He had been getting texts under the table. Recess was called at 11:38 for lunch. Judge Halm said back at 1 o'clock sharp. We filed out, and the pouches came off the rack. And I took my phone to the window at the end of the hall where you could get a bar and a half and turned it on. The first thing on the screen wasn't a text. It was the door sensor. I had those sensors because the insurance company sent them free with the renter's policy. A little camera for the front porch and 2 contact sensors. And I had spent one Saturday sticking them on with double-sided tape and naming them wrong. The front door was Front Drive. The back slider I had named Door 2 and never fixed. Front Drive opened 9:07 a.m. Front Drive closed 9:33 a.m. 26 minutes. I want to explain why that stopped me, standing in a courthouse hallway holding a phone before I'd read a single word of news. Wyatt did not leave doors open. That was not a rule I gave him. It was a thing he was. He had been closing doors behind himself since he could reach the knob. When he came in from the yard, the door was shut before his second foot was inside. He turned the deadbolt without being told, and then, some nights, went back and checked it. He got that from me. I lived in a bad apartment in my 20s. 26 minutes of open door on a 96-degree day, with the window unit running, in a house where I counted the electric bill in dollars per day. Then the camera clips. There were 4. Our porch camera normally got one motion event every couple of days, and it was always the mail carrier or a cat. The first was at 9:04, and it was 11 seconds long, and it was my son. He came out onto the top step in gray socks, no shoes, and stopped. He turned his head to the left, toward the Vances, and he stayed like that. The clip is 11 seconds, and he moves twice, once to put his hand on the rail, once to shift his weight. He is not scared in it. That's the thing I couldn't get past. He is not scared. He is not calling out. He is not running. He is looking at something down the road the way you look at a car accident that already happened. I watched it 4 times, standing at that window, and the 4th time I turned the volume up all the way and put the phone against my ear, and behind the fan noise of the camera's own microphone there was a kid's voice, far off, high, going up at the end. Not a word, just up at the end, twice. The second clip, 9:19, is the road. A figure at the very edge of the frame, walking down the middle of Sumac Road in a light-colored housecoat, and out of frame. The camera caught 8 seconds of it and none of it clear. The third, 9:31, is Wyatt again, going back inside. The door shuts. The fourth is 10:52, and it's nothing. Wind on the mailbox flag. Then the texts, and they came in a lump, out of order, because our tower in Hoyt runs off a fiber line that is fine until it isn't. 10:47. Mom is Aubrey's grandma, okay, 9:22. Somebody's in the road, 9:26. She's just standing there, she won't. 10:49. I locked at 11:03. Aubrey is crying, but she won't come out, 11:31. Mom, that last one on its own. Just Mom. I called him. It rang twice, and he picked up and said, Mom, in a completely normal voice. And I sat down on the wooden bench in that hallway because my legs did something. Here's what he told me, and I'm going to give it plain because he gave it plain. At about 9, he heard Aubrey yelling, not playing. He went out on the porch, and Miss Ivy was standing in the road past the Vance's mailbox with her back to him, in her housecoat, and Aubrey was on their porch yelling Grandma over and over. He said Miss Ivy did not turn around the whole time he watched. He said a car came up the road, the gray car that goes to the elevator, and it stopped and honked twice, and then went around her through the ditch and kept going. He said she didn't move when he honked. He said Aubrey went back inside after a while. He said the ambulance came about 10, not to the Vances, to the Osters at the corner, and then it left with nobody in it. And then 20 minutes later it came back and left again the same way. And the second time he counted, there were 3 people on the Osters' lawn, and one of them was sitting down on the grass in the driveway, not doing anything. Then he said, the clinic phone says press 8 now. It didn't used to have an 8. That was mine. He'd heard me complain about phone trees for 6 years. He'd called the Bell Creek Clinic because that's what his mother would have done. And he'd noticed the menu had changed, and he'd filed it. The way you file a thing when you're 12 and you're alone and you're trying to build the world out of small pieces. I had a bar and a half of signal in a courthouse hallway and 18 minutes of recess, and I said to him, okay, you did everything right. Stay inside, keep the doors locked, don't answer the door, don't call 911 unless there's fire or blood, and I'm going to leave here and be home by 2:30. That was 11:56 in the morning. I was 52 miles away with a river between us, and I told my 12-year-old I would be home by 2:30. It was not a guess. It was not optimism. It was a thing I said in a confident voice because I could hear that he was calm, and I wanted him to stay calm. And a calm number is easier to hold on to than the truth, which was that I did not know. He said, okay. And then he said, can I have the window unit before noon? I said yes. That call is why he was still in that house at 7 o'clock that night. Not the river, not the train. Because his mother gave him a time and he was a kid who believed his mother's times. And he sat in the living room in front of the window unit with the door locked, waiting for a car that was 50 miles from being able to reach him. And he did not do the thing he eventually did until it was almost too late to do it. I went and found the bailiff, Deputy Aurelia Munn, in the little office off the jury room. I knew her a bit by then. She'd been the one to show us where the coffee was on Monday, and had told me the machine took quarters and then given me 2. I told her my son was home alone, and there was something going on in Hoyt, and I needed to be released. She listened to all of it. She did not rush me. And then she said the thing that decided the next 3 hours of my life. She said, "You'll have to ask him yourself, on the record. He won't take it from me." I said, "Okay." And then she said, and I don't blame her for it, she was being straight with me. "Ren, he lost Juror 6 Tuesday. If he loses you, he's got no alternate. And if he loses one more after that, this whole thing goes over. He's going to ask you questions in front of everybody. 14 people, 2 attorneys, a court reporter, a gallery with maybe 9 people in it. One of them a man from the co-op who'd been staring at the jury all week." And I thought about standing up and saying, "My son says the neighbor lady is standing in the road and won't move." And I heard how it would sound out loud in that room with the paneling and the seal on the wall. I thought about the judge asking me what specifically had occurred. I thought about not having an answer that was made of anything but a boy in socks on a porch. So I said, "Will there be an afternoon recess?" She said, "Usually around 2:30. And I said, "I'll ask him then." I have been asked since why. People are kind about it mostly. They say, "You couldn't have known." They say, "That's a lot to walk out of." The honest answer is that I did not want to be the woman who caused a mistrial over a feeling. I had been on public assistance for 2 years after the divorce, and I had spent all of that time being looked at by people with clipboards, and I had gotten very good at not being the problem. I had a badge that said alternate 2 and a check coming for $12 a day, and I sat back down in that box at 1 o'clock sharp and put my phone in pocket 9 of a canvas pouch because a man in a robe had told me to. Those 90 minutes are the only part of this I still argue with in my head. The afternoon session was the co-op man again, and then a woman from a bank. There was a window on the east side of the courtroom, high, with wire in the glass. And from where I sat in the box, I could see the top third of the county annex parking lot across the street. At about 1:20, the plaintiff's attorney asked for a sidebar, and got it. It lasted a while. At about 1:40, a vehicle went past on 3rd Street with its siren on, and did not stop, and did not fade the way they do. It just cut off mid-note, and I understood later that they'd been told to run silent. At about 2 o'clock, Juror 9, a young guy who worked at the tire place, started shifting in his seat and looking at the door, and I saw Deputy Munn come in and stand at the back and not leave. At 2:11, the lights browned down for about a second and a half and came back. The court reporter didn't stop. At 2:19, a phone went off in the gallery, loudly, and then a second one, and then a third. And it was not a ringtone. It was the alert tone, the one that sounds like a car alarm designed by the government. And it went off in 3 pockets at once, and then in the canvas pouch by the door, muffled, 14 phones at the same time in a bag on a rack. And that sound is the one I hear when I think about that afternoon. Not screaming, a canvas bag buzzing on a hook. Judge Holmes said, "We'll take our recess." It was 2:38. He'd almost made it to his usual time. The alert said, "Public health emergency. Residents of Vercher, Ashmore, and Delmore counties are advised to remain in place. Do not travel to hospitals, clinics, or urgent care. Emergency lines are for life-threatening emergencies only. Further information will follow." That was all of it. Nothing about what, nothing about a name for it. Somebody in the gallery read it out loud twice and then said, "Remain in place where?" Judge Holm came back at 2:51 and released us and told us to be back at 8:30 Friday morning. And I want to say something about him, because it would be easy to make him a fool. He wasn't. He was a 70-year-old man following a procedure that had never failed him on a day when nobody in that building had enough information to justify breaking anything. He looked shaken when he said it. He said, "Drive carefully," which he had not said any other day. I got my phone out of pocket 9, and I was in the stairwell before the rest of them were out of the box. Wyatt's text, sent at 1:30, delivered at 2:52. Aubrey is at the back door. My car was a 2009 Corolla with 214,000 miles on it and a cooling system that was fine as long as you were moving. 3/8 of a tank. I had a case of bottled water in the trunk left over from Wyatt's baseball, 11 bottles warm. A phone charger that worked if you held the cord at an angle. My lunch bag with an apple and half a sandwich. I got out of Delmore at 3:04 and called him from the on-ramp. He picked up and said, "Don't be mad." Aubrey Vance had been at our backslider since around 1, and he had not opened it, because I had told him not to open the door, and he had stood there on the other side of the glass from a 9-year-old for 20 minutes doing what I told him. Then he opened it, and on that phone call, on the on-ramp to State Route 9, I got angry with my son. I said, "What did I tell you?" I said, "You don't know where she's been." I said, "Wyatt, what if her grandma—" and then stopped myself and started again and said, "Is she sick? Look at her." "Is she sick?" He said, "She's eating cereal." 40 seconds, maybe 50. That's what I spent. And what I should have spent it on, right there at 3:15 in the afternoon with a bar of signal and a full battery, was 3 sentences. "Wyatt, if it gets bad, go to Roy Tibbetts. He's home. He'll take you. I'll call him." I didn't say it. Not because I forgot. Because I still, at 3:15 that afternoon, believed I'd be home by dark. And because I had spent 5 years building that rule in his head. And I wasn't ready to knock it down over a phone call. And because Roy Tibbett burned his trash and yelled at a kid in 2019. I told him instead, 2 hours, maybe 3. Keep Aubrey away from the front window. Fill the bathtub. Don't call Aubrey's mom's cell more than once an hour. The towers are busy. He said, "Okay." He said, "Mom, the road's got a lot of cars on it." Sumac Road gets 4 cars an hour. That should have meant something to me. It meant something to him. State Route 9 north out of Delmore ran fine for 11 miles, and then the detour signs started. Orange, and I knew them by heart, and I got over into the right lane behind a livestock trailer and turned east on the Bethel Road with everybody else. It took 8 minutes to go the first mile, and then we stopped. I want to describe the traffic honestly, because it was not a disaster movie. It was farm country stopped traffic on a hot day. Trucks, a school bus with no kids in it going the other way, 2 women in a Buick with the windows down because the AC didn't work. A man in a landscaping truck who got out and walked up the line and came back and told the Buick something, and they laughed. And I hated him for that laugh for a good 10 minutes, until I understood he was just a man being a man in a line of cars. The radio gave me nothing usable. The Delmore station ran the alert text verbatim on a loop between songs. The Quintus station had a man saying that the hospital in Quintus had gone to a modified intake posture, and that people should not come to the emergency room and should call ahead. And then he said, and I have thought about this a lot, "They're telling us not to say certain words on the air, so I'm going to say what I can say. If your people are out, get them in." Then he played a song. The needle on my temperature gauge came up off the peg after 20 minutes of that, and sat 1 line below the middle, which was normal for the Corolla in stop and go. And I turned the heater on full blast in a 96-degree car to pull heat off the engine, which is a thing my uncle taught me, and rolled all 4 windows down and drove like that. It works. It also makes you feel like you are being punished. At 4:25, I got to the first crossing on the Ashmore subdivision and found the train. It wasn't moving. It wasn't wrecked. It was a freight train standing on the rails with its air dumped, and it went east out of sight and west out of sight. And there were 14 or 15 cars stopped at the crossing, and people standing in the road looking at it the way you look at weather. A man in a feed cap told me it had been sitting since 2:30. He said a guy had walked up to the head end and there was nobody in it, which I later understood was not sabotage or panic. A crew hits their hours, and the law says they stop, and the van that brings the relief crew comes from Quintus, and on that particular afternoon, the van did not come from Quintus. 3 crossings on the Bethel Road inside 9 miles, Kessler Road, Coon Hollow, and the Bethel crossing itself. I drove to all 3. I did it in 40 minutes, and it cost me a quarter tank, and it was, in hindsight, the stupidest driving I did all day, and I'd do it again, because you have to see it yourself. Same train at all 3. At the second crossing, there were maybe 30 people, and some of them had started to walk. That's the image from that day I'd hand you if I could hand you one. Ordinary people in work clothes and church clothes, and one woman in scrubs, climbing between 2 coupled freight cars in the middle of a soybean county, handing bags across to each other, and a man in a high-vis vest, not a railroad man, just a man who owned a vest standing there saying, "If it moves, it'll take your legs off. Do not sit down on that coupler. Do not sit down," over and over to everyone, because that is a real way to die, and everybody there knew it. I did it. I got to the far side with my purse and 3 bottles of water and my phone at 61%, and I stood on the north side of a train in a county where my car was on the wrong side, and I realized what I had actually done. I was on foot. My son was 38 road miles away with a river in between, and the only crossing I could reach on foot was Kell's Ferry, which was a construction site. And there was no reason at all to believe a work crew was still standing on it at 5 o'clock on the 12th of June. So I climbed back through. That was the hardest physical thing I did that day, and the second hardest decision. Going back through that train felt like undoing my son. I got to the car at 5:05 and it started, and I called him. 13% battery on his end. That's the number he gave me. His charger was the one in the kitchen and it had quit working in May, and I had been going to get another one. I gave him instructions, and I want to set them down because they are the last useful thing I did as his mother for about 7 hours. Turn the phone off. Not sleep. Off. Turn it on at 7 and I'll call at 7. Fill anything that holds water. The bathtub, the stock pot, the 2-liter bottles in the recycling under the sink. Don't run the window unit after the power flickers. Both of you sleep in the hall bathroom if it gets dark and I'm not there. Not the bedroom. The bathroom has no window. And he said, "Mom, are you close?" And I said, "I'm coming up on Quintus," which was a lie by about 20 miles, and by a river, and by a train. He said, "Okay." And then he said something that I think about more than any of it. He said, "Aubrey wants to know if her grandma's going to be at her house when she goes back." I said I didn't know. That was true, at least. I got one true thing in. The Corolla died at 17 minutes to 6 on the shoulder of the Bethel Road, 3 miles short of nothing. It didn't blow up or steam or do anything dramatic. It just got hot in a line of cars that wasn't moving, and the needle went up past the middle and kept going, and I shut it off and sat there. And then I got out and stood in front of it with my hands on my head like a person in a commercial. I took my purse, 8 bottles of water in a plastic grocery sack doubled up, the phone charger, the apple, and a fleece jacket from the back seat that I almost left. And that jacket is the reason I didn't spend that night shaking. I left. The car, the registration in the glove box, and a folder with my medical billing passwords in it that I never got back. And I started walking west along the Bethel Road, against the direction I'd driven, because west was the only thing that made sense anymore. Junie Trepp stopped for me at 4 minutes after 6. She was driving an F250 with a flatbed and a dog box on it, and she had her 9-year-old, Colton, in the middle of the bench seat and 2 5-gallon cans strapped in the bed. And she stopped because she is that kind of person, and she rolled the window down and said, "Where?" I said, "Hoyt." She said, "You know about the river?" I said, "I know about the river." She said, "Get in." Junie was maybe 50. And she farmed with her brother, and she talked in short pieces with long gaps. Her boy did not say a word for the first 15 minutes, and then said one thing, to me, out of nowhere. "Our dog won't come out from under the porch." Junie said, "Colt." He didn't say anything else for a while. I told her what I was trying to do. She let me finish, and then she said, "Ferry Road." I said, "It's condemned." She said, "It's condemned to a truck." That was the first moment all day when a road opened instead of closed, and it came out of a stranger's mouth in a pickup with a dog box. She said the barriers were on the south approach, 2 of them, set at an angle so a car couldn't thread it. But a person could walk around the end of the north one where the shoulder washed out, and the slab itself was fine. It was the pipes underneath the county was worried about, and the river was low because it hadn't rained in 11 days. She said, "My uncle drove that bridge for 40 years and it'll be there when we're not." She drove me 22 miles out of her way to get me there. Her husband was at home with a generator and a list of things to do, and she drove me 22 miles. On the way, at about 6:40, I asked to use her phone. Mine was at 9% and had been searching for signal since the train. Junie's phone had a bar. She had one of the other carriers, the one that has the tower on the water plant. And this is the part where I have to tell you what I did with a stranger's telephone at 6:40 at night, 13 miles from my son. I opened my own phone and went into the photo gallery, and I scrolled back 13 months to a picture of a carbon copy code enforcement complaint form, and I read a number off it in my own pencil handwriting, and I dialed it on Junie Trepp's phone. It rang 6 times. I remember counting because at 4 I started planning what I'd do at 10. He answered, "Tibbet." I said, "Roy, this is Ren Doyle." From down the road, the yellow house. There was a pause that was long enough for me to hear a television behind him. And then he said, "I know who you are." I told him, all of it, in about 90 seconds, and I could hear my own voice doing something I've never heard it do before or since, going flat and fast like a dispatcher. 2 kids in the yellow house on Sumac, 12 and 9. Aubrey Vance from 2 doors down. Ivy Vance had walked out in the road at 9 this morning and nobody had seen her since. I was on the wrong side of the river and I was going to be walking in after dark. He said, "Where's Charisse?" I said, "Quintus, the distribution center. I don't know." He was quiet again, and then he said, "I went over there at 3 o'clock. Nobody came to the door." And I understood, standing on the passenger side of a farm truck with a stranger's phone against my ear, that Roy Tibbet had already walked down to my house that afternoon, on his own, an hour and a half before I called, and had knocked on my front door, and that my son had been on the other side of it doing exactly what I trained him to do. I said, "He won't open it for you." Roy said, "No, he wouldn't." Neither of us said the reason out loud. That's a mercy I'll give him credit for until I die. He had to have known. Small road, people talk. He had to have known why a 12-year-old wouldn't open a door for him. I said, "There's a word, from when he was little. If you say it, he'll know it came from me." He said, "Go ahead." I said, "Buckeye." He said it back to me once to make sure he had it, and then he said, "Anything else?" I said, "Tell him the rule about somebody being hurt is changed. He'll know what that means." And Roy Tibbet said, "All right." And then he said, "I'll leave my shed open and the light on in it either way," and hung up before I could say thank you, which I have decided was deliberate. Junie put me out at the Ferry Road barriers at 20 past 7. She wrote her number on the back of a fuel receipt, and I lost it in the field and have never found her again. And I've tried. The Virture at Ferry Road that evening was maybe knee-deep over most of it and running clear. The slab bridge sat about 4 feet above the water, cracked along one edge, with grass growing out of the joints and a fresh county sign zip-tied to the barrier. I went around the north end, where the shoulder had washed, on my hands in the dirt, and walked across a bridge that had been closed for 2 months, and it did not so much as creak. I could see, from the middle of it, the far bank and the gravel of the county road, and the sun coming down orange over the trees, and a line of high-tension towers marching north through the timber like a seam. That's what got me home. Not a road, a transmission easement. They cut those 120 feet wide, and they mow them, and they run for miles in a line that doesn't care about property or rivers, or the way roads have to bend around a farm. There's a gravel 2-track under some of them for the trucks, and gates where they cross fences, and every so often a place where you go down through the brush and cross a creek on rocks because the trucks have a way around and you don't. The one north of the Ferry Road Bridge ran within about 6/10 of a mile of Sumac Road. And I knew that because Wyatt and I had walked a piece of it in April looking for morels, and had not found any. And he had complained the whole way. And I had said, "This is quality time, buddy." And he had said, "This is walking." I started up it at 7:40 with 8 bottles of water down to 5. A fleece jacket around my waist, a dead phone in my purse, and about 80 minutes of light. It took me almost 3 hours to go 6 miles. Some of that was the ground, which is mowed but rough, cut stumps and ruts and half bricks of dried mud. Some of it was the fences. Some of it was that I'd been in dress flats since 7 in the morning, and by the 2nd mile, my heels had opened up and I was walking on the outsides of my feet like a duck. But most of it was that I stopped a lot to listen, and after dark, I stopped more. 2 things happened on that walk that I'll tell. The first was at about 8:45, still gray out, in the stretch where the easement crosses the Coon Hollow blacktop. There's a gap in the trees there, and you can see maybe a half mile of road in both directions. There was a car sitting in the middle of that road with both front doors open and the dome light on and nothing else. No people. It had been there long enough for the battery to still be doing its job, which meant not that long. I stood at the tree line for probably 4 minutes trying to decide if crossing that blacktop was worth it, which it had to be, since the easement went straight over it. And while I was standing there, a pickup came from the west, slowed way down for the car with the doors open, and then went around it and kept going, fast, didn't stop. Same thing the gray car did for Ivy Vance at 9 in the morning, 11 miles north. That's when I stopped thinking of it as an emergency. Emergencies have people running toward things. The second was after full dark, maybe 2 miles out from home, in a stretch where the easement runs between 2 woodlots, and the mowing hadn't been done that year, so the grass was up past my knees. There was somebody standing in it. I want to be careful here because I know what people want from this part, and I don't have it for them. I never got closer than about 60 feet. It was dark, with just enough moon to make shapes. It was a person, standing in tall grass in the middle of a power line easement at 10 o'clock at night, facing the towers, not moving in a way that a person waiting is not moving. There's a difference, and every animal knows it, and I knew it. I got down in the grass, and I went sideways into the woodlot, and I made an enormous amount of noise doing it, and I went about 200 yards through timber in the dark, falling twice, holding my purse against my chest like a woman crossing a parking lot. And when I came back out onto the easement, the shape was still there, in the same place, at the same angle, and it had not turned around. I don't know if it heard me. I don't know what it was. I have decided that not knowing is the correct amount of knowing. I came out at the corner of the Dunmore field at 20 past 10 and walked the last half mile down the ditch line of Sumac Road. In the ditch, not on the road. And the ditch was full of dry mullein, and I could hear myself breaking it the whole way and could not do anything about it. Our house was dark, every light off. The window unit not running, which meant the power was out, or he'd turned it off like I said. The front door shut, and when I came up the steps and put my hand on it, unlocked. I have never had a feeling like that, and I hope not to again. The unlocked door of your own house with your kid supposed to be inside it. I went through the whole place calling his name in a voice I was trying to keep low, which is a thing you can't do. The bathtub was full, the stock pot was full and sitting on the floor of the hallway with a plate on top of it, which is a thing I never told him to do. He just did it. 2 cereal bowls in the sink, a blanket and 2 pillows on the bathroom floor, and Aubrey's flip-flops. The back slider was open 8 inches with the screen shut, and out the back, across the yard, over the fence line and down the road, 1 light, a bare bulb in a machine shed. 3 houses down. I went down the ditch again because at that point the ditch was just how I traveled. I came up Roy Tibbetts Drive past his truck and past the burn barrel, and Duchess came off the porch at me hard and low and did not bark once, which was worse. And a voice from the dark by the shed said, "Duchess, down." He was sitting on a 5-gallon bucket outside the shed door with a flashlight in his lap, not turned on. He said, "They're asleep." I said, "Both?" He said, "Both." And then, because I was not capable of anything else, I stood in a man's gravel driveway at 11 o'clock at night and cried in a way I have not done in front of another adult since my mother's funeral. And Roy Tibbet did not touch me, did not say a word, and after a while got up and went in the shed and came out with a jar of water and handed it to me and sat back down on the bucket. Here's what happened at my house that day, which I got in pieces over the following week. Some from Wyatt, some from Aubrey, some from Roy. Roy knocked on our front door at 3. Wyatt saw him through the window and did not answer, and told Aubrey to get in the hall. At about 5:30, the power went out, and not a flicker, just off. At about 6:30, Aubrey went to the front window, which she had been told not to do, and Ivy Vance was on the Vance's porch across the way. Not in the road, on her own porch, at the top of the steps, facing the door. Wyatt got Aubrey into the bathroom and shut the door, and they sat in there with the flashlight off for about an hour, and Aubrey cried, and he told her about a video game the whole time. Not to distract her, because it was the only thing he could think of to say for an hour. At about 8, in the dark, Roy came back. He came around the back this time and knocked on the glass of the slider, and he said, through the glass, in the words Wyatt gave me, "Son, your mother called me. She's south of the river. She said to tell you Buckeye. She said the rule about somebody being hurt is changed." And my son did not open the door. He told me later it was dark and I couldn't see if it was really him or not. Which was correct. Which was from a 12-year-old, in the dark, alone with a 9-year-old. The correct call, and I'll say so forever. He told Roy through the glass to come back when it was light. Roy said, "All right." Roy said the shed's open and the light's on in it, and there's a bed in there and the door has a bar on the inside, and left. And then, about 40 minutes later, Wyatt made his own decision. He said the reason was that Aubrey wouldn't stop shaking. He said, "She was doing it in her legs and she couldn't stop, and I thought she was getting sick." She wasn't sick. She was 9, and her grandmother was on the porch across the road. He put water bottles and a box of crackers and Aubrey's flip-flops in his school backpack. He took her out the back slider, and he did not go down the road because Ivy Vance was on the roadside. He took her along our back fence and through the Dunmore's cut corn to the culvert and up the ditch, in the dark, holding her hand, 3 houses down. And he didn't knock on Roy Tibbet's door, because his mother had told him for 5 years not to. He went in the shed, which had a light on in it, and a cot, and a bar on the inside of the door. Roy found them in there at about 9:45 when he went out to check the generator, and by then they had eaten 4 of his tomatoes off the windowsill, and Aubrey was asleep on the cot, and Wyatt was sitting against the door with the bar across it. Roy told me that part exactly once, in the driveway that night, in about 11 words. He said, "He didn't come to my door, he come to my shed." He wasn't accusing me. That's what I want to be clear about. He said it the way you'd report a fence line, and I stood there and took it, because he had left that shed light on knowing. We stayed at Roy Tibbet's for 19 days. I'm not going to dress it up. It was not a haven, and he was not secretly a wonderful man. He was a difficult, blunt, sometimes mean old man with fixed opinions and a hard way of saying things. And he was also, in the plainest sense, the reason my son is alive. And both of those are true at the same time, and I've had to learn to hold them. What he had: a house on a half-acre with a good roof, a 500-gallon propane tank that had been filled in April and sat at about 60%, a generator that ran his well pump and his chest freezer and nothing else, on off-road diesel out of a farm tank his son-in-law used to fill, a wood stove in the garage, his late wife Marlene's hospital bed still in the front room, and her walker, and a cabinet of gauze and wipes and a box of adult diapers, all of which mattered more than any of us guessed at the time. A .22 for varmints and a shotgun for the same, both of which stayed in the closet the whole 19 days, which I mention because people always assume otherwise. What he did not have: enough food for 4 people. Any way to keep insulin cold indefinitely once the diesel ran low, which mattered when the Oster's daughter turned up on day 9. any interest in discussion. His rules were not written down, but they were absolute. Nobody outside between dusk and full light. The generator ran twice a day, an hour in the morning and an hour at night, and if you wanted water in a bucket, you got it in those windows. The roadside curtains stayed shut. No fires outside, which was rich, coming from him. And I said so on day 6, and he said, "It was legal in October and I burned in June, and I'll take that up with the county when the county comes back." And the thing I had to swallow, over and over, for 19 days. He did not ask me. He asked Wyatt. Not out of cruelty. It's that Wyatt had been there first, and Wyatt knew where things were in that shed. And Wyatt was small enough to get into the crawl space under the back porch where the water lines were. And Wyatt got up when Roy got up. By day 4, my son could tell you how much diesel was in the tank by the sound the pump made. By day 7, he was the one who said, at the kitchen table, that we should stop running the freezer at night and let it coast. And Roy thought about it and said, "That's right." And that was the whole conversation. I did the dishes. I inventoried the pantry, which was a habit from my old life and which nobody had asked for. I changed a 9-year-old's Band-Aids and braided her hair badly and lay next to her at night while she asked me questions about her grandmother that I answered wrong every time. I was the least useful adult in that house, and I knew it every single day. Ivy Vance was on the road or in the yards on sumac for 6 days. I saw her twice through a gap in the curtain, and I will not describe her. She was a woman who brought me a coffee cake in 2021. On the 6th day, she wasn't there anymore, and nobody in that house said one word about where she went. And Roy came in at noon and washed his hands for a long time at the kitchen sink and asked what was for lunch. Aubrey's mother came on day 6, in the evening, walking from the north. Charisse Vance had been at the distribution center in Quintus when they locked the doors, and had been in that building for 4 days with about 90 other people, and had walked and hitched and walked the last of it. She came up Roy's drive at dusk, and Duchess went off, and Roy went out with the flashlight and then hollered for me in a voice I hadn't heard him use. That reunion is not mine to describe. I'll only say that Aubrey did not run to her. She looked at me first to see if it was allowed, which is a thing I still have to sit down about. And then there was the argument, on day 7, about whether Charisse should take Aubrey to her sister's outside Marbury, 90 miles northwest, on foot and by whatever rides she could get. And Roy said no, flat, and Charisse said she wasn't asking, and Roy said he knew that, and then said, "You'll be walking her past what's on this road." And Charisse sat down on the step. They stayed. All of them. 6 people, then 8 when the Oster's daughter and her husband came, then 9. That's what I mean about community pressure. It didn't arrive as a mob at a gate. It arrived as people you knew, one at a time, at dusk, standing at the end of a driveway. And every single time somebody had to decide. And after the first week, the person doing the deciding was a 68-year-old man who kept looking over at a 12-year-old for confirmation. He let everybody in. Everyone. I want that on the record too, next to the burn barrel and the yelling and the 1979 conviction I repeated twice without checking. The reason it worked, for as long as it worked, was the roads. Sumac Road runs north off the Ferry Road blacktop and dead ends at the Dunmore Field. To get to us, you had to cross the Virture, and Kells Ferry was a construction site with the deck torn up, and the Quintus Bridge was 22 miles east and past the hospital, and Ferry Road was barricaded and posted, "Bridge out." We were behind 3 closures that a stranger with a map could not see, and that no state route sign would ever tell you about. Nobody came up our road for 11 days except people who already knew it was there. On the 19th day, that ended. It happened in the mundane way everything in this happened. On the 15th day, the train finally moved. We heard it, faintly, from 6 miles off, and everybody in the house came out on the porch to listen to a freight train the way people used to listen to a moon landing. On the 17th day, a state truck came down Ferry Road and pulled the 2 Jersey barriers off the low-water bridge and stacked them in the grass and drove away without talking to anybody, because somebody in an office had figured out what Junie Trepp's uncle already knew, that a condemned bridge is only condemned to a truck. And on the 19th day, our road became the shortest way from the south half of the county to the north half. They started coming at about 8 in the morning. Not a flood. A car, then two, then a pickup with a mattress, then a van that stopped in front of the Vances for a long time and then went on. By noon, we'd counted 26 vehicles on a road that used to get 4 an hour and now had no reason not to be a highway. And late that afternoon, one of them turned in. It was a small car with 3 people in it and a dog, and it came up Roy's drive and stopped, and the man got out and stood by his door and did not come closer, which was the polite way to do it by then, and he said his wife was in the passenger seat and she'd had a bad reaction to something and they'd been to the Quintus hospital and been turned around, and he asked if we had any place they could sit for a while out of the sun. Roy came out onto the porch and looked at the car for a while. Then he turned around and he looked past me. I was standing right there in the doorway. I was the boy's mother. I was one of the 9. And he said, "Wyatt, what do you think?" My son came out onto the porch drying his hands on his shirt. He was 12 years old and he had been outside since 6 with a wrench. He looked at the car and at the woman in the passenger seat, and then, for about a half second, at me. And I understood that the look was not asking permission. It was a courtesy. He was letting me know he'd seen me. Then he said, "Not in the house. The shed's got a bar on the inside. She can lay down in there and we'll bring water out." Roy said, "All right." And that's where I'll leave it, because that's where it actually is. We're still on that road. Charisse and Aubrey have the yellow house with us now. The rent situation resolved itself the way a lot of things did. Roy's propane went dry in November, and we did the winter on the wood stove in the garage with all of us in one room, and I am not going to pretend that was cozy. The diesel ran out in September. The well has a hand pump on it now that Wyatt and Roy put in over 4 days, and I held the flashlight. The county has been through twice. Nobody has said the word outbreak to me yet in any official capacity. The last letter I got from the state used the phrase, "the June event," which is the kind of thing men in offices come up with. I still have the jury summons in a drawer, and the check for 4 days at $12 a day, which arrived in an envelope in August, and which I have not cashed and could not tell you why. And the traffic on Sumac Road has not stopped since the 19th day. It's not constant, but it's there, all day, and at night sometimes, and every single vehicle that comes up that road is a decision somebody in this house has to make in about 4 seconds, with no information. The thing that kept my son alive for 11 hours was that nobody could get to him. That is a hard sentence to have in your head at the same time as the sentence about how I couldn't get to him either. They're the same sentence. I've stopped trying to separate them. He's 13 now. He is out at the shed most mornings before I'm up. He knows the diesel and the well and which of the neighbors will lie about what they need, and when somebody turns in the drive, the old man looks at him first. I'd like to say I'm proud of that, and I am, and I'd trade it. I'd trade every bit of it to go back to a kitchen at 20 to 7 on the 12th of June and hear a boy in socks ask me, for the second time, what he should do if somebody's hurt, and to put my keys down on the counter and take 4 minutes and say, "That depends. Tell me who."